Ready, set, secure.
Welcome everybody again to Inside the Mind of a Hacker. Once again, I'm Hutch, and in this video we're going to be talking about third-party risk. And it probably comes as no surprise that companies these days do not operate within a silo. Any decent-sized company usually specializes in one or two given services or functions, and then they'll outsource almost everything else. And these increasing third-party relationships actually introduce quite a bit of risk to most organizations, and it's one of the areas of risk that is most commonly overlooked. So we're going to look at a couple different attack vectors that hackers are using in order to weaponize your third parties against your organization. So first, let's talk about a compromise of a third party. So one thing that attackers can do is they can deliberately focus their efforts on attacking a supporting third party and then use that as a means to pivot into the ultimate target's network. So there's been several notable examples of this that have happened in recent history. The first would be APT-10, which performed a campaign known as Operation Cloudhopper. And this is where they very deliberately would hack or break into cloud service providers. And then they would survey the different clients that those cloud service providers had to see if they meet the target criteria for what the APT is looking for, and then assuming it did, they would then use those connections to infiltrate the target network. Another very well-known example is APT-28. This was the Russian hacker group that performed the DNC, or the Democratic National Committee breach. And what a lot of people don't know about this breach is that it actually started with a breach of the DCCC, or the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee's network. And then the attackers moved from the DCCC to the DNC in order to ultimately gain access to those emails, chat records, oppositional research, and other stuff that was subsequently leaked. Another third-party risk attack that we're seeing frequently is supply chain malware. So this is where attackers will attempt to gain access to supply chain channels and use those supply chain channels in order to embed malware or embed backdoors that allows them to get a much more amplified downstream impact and infect a lot more systems. So several recent notable examples. One was CCleaner, which was a legitimate utility that was used in Windows systems to clean up your Windows hard drive. And the attackers managed to gain access to the supply chain where the legitimate software was signed and distributed, and actually managed to get backdoors distributed on the legitimate CCleaner website. And then another great example is one of our partners, Reversing Labs, had recently done some work in looking at standard package management libraries for different coding frameworks, such as PyPy for Python, or Node Package Manager, or Gems for Ruby, and noticed that there were a lot of different opportunities, such as typo squatting, that attackers could use in order to get malicious code into those legitimate package managers, where they could ultimately be imported into legitimate development projects. So with all of these increasing threats around third parties, what can we do in order to better secure ourselves? Well, the first thing you need to do is minimize the attack surface through least privilege. And this includes both segmenting off any kind of environments that are interacting with third parties, because ultimately that is an untrusted network that you have no control over. And additionally, using IAM in order to implement least privilege. And this is identity and access management. This is to say that we have controls in place that make sure that the only people that are interacting with those third parties, or the only people that have the ability to interact with those third parties, are those that have a legitimate business need to do so. Also, organizations should have a third-party risk management capability that assesses the risk of partnerships to the organization. And this should be more than just a checklist. This should be more than just a capability of looking at, do you meet X, Y, and Z criteria? And it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach. Instead, in order to be really effective, third-party risk management assessments should tailor the assessment to what the different interactions are going to be between that supporting third party and their business. So for example, if a company was to make services exposed on their DMZ to a supporting third party, and they were going to restrict access to those services by source IP address. Well, one thing that you are going to want to make sure is that not only do you have the segmentation and the controls on your side, but also as part of your third-party risk management assessment, that you are validating that they are implementing the proper segmentation and IAM controls to make sure that whoever is able to access that service from their end, based on the source IP address or source IP ranges that it's coming from, is only people that once again have that business requirement in order to access that service. So it's really about making sure that even if there was a breach of that third party, we could minimize to the greatest extent possible the potential impact to your organization. And finally, another thing that application security professionals need to start considering is third-party code review. And we're seeing more and more different cybersecurity providers that are offering this capability. And this is the idea that in addition to your standard application security controls of threat modeling, static code analysis, and dynamic application security testing, we also want to be looking at the parts of the application that are pulled in from third parties. So any libraries or functions that are imported into the development code. And so this allows you to see not just the security risks that are created by your own developers, but also potential security risks that may have been imported into your development project from malicious third-party sources. So that's it for this video. Thank you for joining once again for Inside the Mind of a Hacker.